Welcome back to the Deep Dive, everybody. Today we're exploring strategic thinking, and it's really exciting because this one is brought to you by Pankaj Shrestha's production,
Absolutely.
and we are both part of his team, and it's amazing to be working with him. Pankaj brings over 30 years of experience, a real strategic mind. He's led all sorts of growth and innovation initiatives.
Yeah, and his focus on creating the right environment for that growth to happen is something that we really admire, and I think it really comes through in our work on these deep dives.
For sure, for sure. And speaking of deep dives, today we're tackling a classic, a text that has influenced strategic thinking for centuries. Sun Tzu's The Art of War.
A big one.
Now, when you hear that title, you might immediately picture ancient battlefields, right?
Right.
Soldiers clashing. But this text goes so far beyond just military tactics.
It really does.
It's about understanding conflict, competition, and achieving victory principles that apply to business, negotiations, even navigating challenges in your own life.
Yeah, it's about gaining advantage and overcoming obstacles, but often in ways that don't involve direct confrontation.
Exactly. So our mission today is to go beyond the historical context, to extract those core lessons from the art of war that you, the listener, can actually apply in your own world. Actionable stuff, things you can use starting today to gain that strategic edge.
Sounds good.
Okay, let's jump right in. We're going to start with the foundation, chapter 1, laying plans.
Right. So this first chapter emphasizes how crucial analysis and planning are before you make any move, really.
Before the first shot is fired, Sun Tzu is telling us that careful assessment, it's absolutely essential, and he gives us 5 core factors to consider.
Right.
The first one, moral law, that's about the unity of the people, their belief in the leader, that sense of shared purpose. Then we have heaven, he's talking about timing, the elements, the seasons, earth, this that covers the physical terrain, distances, those kinds of things. Then there's the commander, naturally focusing on leadership qualities. And finally, method and discipline, which is about organization, logistics, having your act together.
And it's interesting, isn't it, that moral law is the very first factor he mentions. You know, this internal alignment, even before you consider the external factors.
Huge.
It suggests that without a team that's on board that believes in the mission, none of the other stuff really matters. So for leaders listening, you know, how much are you focusing on that internal culture, that buy-in?
Right. It's like you're building that solid foundation for your house, and if the foundation is shaky,
Yeah.
the whole thing's going to crumble. And then, of course, we have the most famous line from Sun Tzu, one that everyone knows. All warfare is based on deception. So it's not just about having a plan. It's about being really strategic, about misleading your opponent,
Right, right.
appearing weak when you're actually strong, seeming far away when you're actually close, that kind of thing.
On the battlefield, this could be, you know, creating false trails to confuse the enemy about where your troops are actually going, exaggerating the size of your forces, anything to throw them off and create an advantage.
And this meticulous planning, this idea that victory is determined even before the first engagement, Sun Tzu really stresses that.
Yeah, he says, many calculations lead to victory and few calculations to defeat. So it's about strategy over just pure bravery.
Exactly, exactly.
It's about thinking through every scenario beforehand. What will the enemy do if we do this? How will we respond? Making sure you have supplies, scouting the terrain. It's all in the planning.
So, okay, let's bring it to the present. How do these ancient ideas apply to our modern world?
Well, you know, I think those 5 factors, they have real relevance to business strategy and even to our personal challenges.
Okay, walk me through that.
So moral law, like we said, that translates to team morale, that sense of shared purpose in a company. It could even be about customer loyalty, you know,
Yeah.
building trust, heaven and earth. Those are about understanding timing, like when's the right time to launch that product, you know, and knowing your environment, the overall market trends, where the industry is headed.
Right, so it's like doing your market research.
Exactly. Then the commander, well, that's obviously about the quality of leadership. And method and discipline, that's about how your organization is structured, how efficient your operations are.
So it's like Sun Tzu's checklist for success. But instead of preparing for battle, we're preparing for, I don't know, a product launch, a big negotiation, anything with stakes, really.
Yeah, I like that. It's a checklist for strategic thinking.
And what about deception? Does that still have a place, obviously within ethical boundaries?
Oh, definitely. I mean, think about a company developing some groundbreaking tech. They're not going to shout it from the rooftops, are they? They want to keep it under wraps until they're ready to launch.
Or you're in a negotiation, And you're not just going to lay all your cards on the table right away.
Right, exactly. You got to hold something back. And that meticulous planning in today's world, the markets are so complex, the competition is fierce. I think it's more important than ever.
So it's Sun Tzu's many calculations, but now it's about market research, analyzing risk, all that.
Exactly.
Okay, so for our listeners, the key lessons from this first chapter,
Yeah.
what should they take away and start using?
Well, I'd say first, before you start anything big, do your homework. Thoroughly assess all the factors. Your strengths and weaknesses, your competitors' strengths and weaknesses, the timing, the conditions, everything.
If that checklist, check, check, check.
Exactly. Second, plan, plan, plan. Don't just jump into action. Think through different scenarios, potential outcomes, what could go wrong, how you'd respond. Sun Tzu said, many calculations lead to victory. It's all about increasing your odds of success.
Love that. And what was that third one? Ethical deception.
Yeah, use it strategically. Don't reveal everything right away. Hold some things back. Keep some secrets.
Ethically. Now I hear you.
Yeah, you got it. And finally, remember that things change. Morale can fluctuate, markets shift, new competitors pop up.
Right.
You got to keep monitoring, reevaluating, adjusting your plans as needed. That constant adaptation is key.
Okay, so that's laying the groundwork. Now let's talk about actually executing, putting those plans into action. We'll move on to Chapter 2, Waging War.
All right, so this chapter emphasizes a couple of key things. First, that waging war, conflict of any kind, it's costly.
It takes a toll.
Yeah, not just financially, but time, energy, morale. It can drain you.
Exactly.
So Sun Tzu stresses speed and efficiency. Hit hard, hit fast, don't let things drag on.
He's not messing around with this one.
No, he's very direct. He says, if victory is long in coming, weapons grow dull and morale falls. If a campaign drags on, the state's resources will be too exhausted to sustain it.
Ouch.
Yeah. And he's even more blunt when he says there is no instance of a country having benefited from prolonged warfare.
It's like he's seen it happen too many times.
Right. So swift, decisive action is key. Minimize the cost, get it done.
Get in, get out.
Yeah, exactly. And the other key principle in this chapter is what Sun Tzu calls foraging on the enemy.
Interesting. I don't think I've heard this one before.
It's basically about using the enemy's resources whenever possible. He points out that seizing a wagon of supplies from the enemy, it's like gaining 20 of your own.
Make them pay for the war.
In a sense, yeah. And it's not just about physical supplies. He also talks about treating captured soldiers well, potentially even getting them to join your side.
So turning those enemy assets to your advantage. Wow, that's actually pretty ahead of his time, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. It's recognizing that sometimes incorporating those resources rather than just destroying them, it's more strategic in the long run.
Okay, so let's bring this to the present. What does this look like in our world?
Yeah.
Because we're not literally seizing wagons of supplies from competitors.
Right, right. But think about those situations where businesses get bogged down in these long, drawn-out fights, price wars that just keep going and going, or maybe companies constantly trying to one-up each other with features, spending tons of money.
Yeah. Feature creep. That's a good one.
Yeah. And these kinds of battles, they can be really damaging for everyone involved. Sun Tzu would probably say, find a quicker, more strategic way to gain an advantage, or maybe even know when to walk away from the fight.
Cut your losses.
Exactly. And it's really relevant in the tech world. You have a company that spends years and a fortune trying to develop the perfect product.
Yeah.
Well, they might just miss the market entirely.
The market moves so fast these days.
Exactly. So often it's better to get something out there quickly, an MVP, a minimum viable product, even if it's not perfect.
Get that early feedback, iterate.
Yeah. And this applies even to everyday projects, setting crazy long timelines that can really kill morale and momentum.
It's like the army getting tired and losing their fighting spirit.
Exactly. So set achievable deadlines, celebrate the small wins, keep that energy up. And what about using your enemy's resources? Well, in today's world, that could be about ethically leveraging your competitor's research.
Ooh, sneaky.
Well, as long as it's publicly available information, why not use it? And in mergers and acquisitions, it could be about effectively integrating the assets and talent of a company you've acquired, treating new employees well,
Bringing them into the fold.
Exactly. That's the modern day equivalent of Sun Tzu's advice on captives.
I like that. Okay, so what are the key takeaways from this chapter for our listeners? Let's be efficient here.
All right, so number 1, aim for quick wins.
Make it snappy.
Yeah, exactly. Don't let things drag on. Set those deadlines. Push for resolution. If you're stuck in a rut, reassess. Maybe it's time for a different approach.
Number two,
Be ruthless about managing your resources. Your budget, time, energy, assets, everything is valuable. Maximize efficiency. Find creative ways to repurpose what you already have. Plan ahead so you're not constantly scrambling for more.
love it. Okay, number three.
This is the foraging principle. Exploit opportunities, but do it ethically. Use your competitors' weaknesses to your advantage. Maybe recruit talent they've let go. Look for publicly available research that can give you a leg up.
Be resourceful.
Exactly. Number 4, and this is crucial, keep morale high by achieving results. Get those small wins. Celebrate progress. Keep the momentum going. Because if things stall, well, morale drops, people get discouraged, and your competitors might just swoop in and take advantage.
That makes sense. Okay, last one.
Know when to fold them. Sometimes continuing a fight is just not worth it. It's draining, it's distracting, and it might even be leading you down the wrong path. Have the courage to cut your losses or maybe shift your approach entirely.
I love that. Know when to walk away from the table.
Yeah, exactly. It can be a powerful move in itself.
Okay, so we've talked about planning and efficient execution, but now let's get to one of the most intriguing aspects of the art of war. Winning without actually fighting. This is chapter 3, attack by stratagem.
This is where it gets really interesting. Sun Tzu presents this idea that the ultimate victory, the most skillful win, is the one where you don't even have to fight a battle.
That's powerful, outsmarting them completely.
Yeah, it's about using strategy, diplomacy, psychology, maybe even a little bit of manipulation, but all within certain bounds.
Give me a quote from Sun Tzu on this one.
Okay, he says, "To fight and conquer in all your battles is not supreme excellence. Supreme excellence consists of breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting. So it's not about brute force, it's about being smarter."
I love that. And he even gives us this hierarchy of attack, right?
Yeah, he lays out the most effective ways to attack, starting with attacking the enemy's strategy itself. Then it goes to disrupting their alliances, then attacking their army in the field, and lastly, and this is the worst option, laying siege to their cities.
So basically, you want to disrupt the enemy's game plan before it even gets started.
Exactly. Don't just react to their moves, get ahead of them.
Anticipate.
Yes. And another thing he talks about is taking the enemy's territory whole and intact rather than destroying it.
So it's about preservation as well.
Right. It's a more sustainable victory. There's more to gain if you don't just leave a trail of destruction in your wake.
I like that. So when Sun Tzu is talking about knowing when to fight and when not to, what does he mean by that?
Well, I think it comes down to picking your battles. Sometimes engaging directly head to head. It's just not the most strategic move. It might actually play into the enemy's hands.
Okay, so you need to know your own strengths, but also your enemy's weaknesses.
Yeah, you got to understand both sides of the equation. And you also need that internal unity, that high morale within your own ranks. You got to be prepared, and ideally, you want to catch the enemy when they're not prepared.
The element of surprise.
Yes. And of course, you need strong leadership, someone who can make the tough calls, who's not going to be swayed by outside pressure.
Okay, so that's a lot to think about. How does this translate to, the business world or even just our personal challenges?
Well, I think it's about those companies that find those clever ways to win. They outmaneuver their competitors. Maybe they find a blue ocean market.
I've heard that term before. What is it again?
It's a market where there's basically no competition, You're not fighting for scraps. You're creating your own space.
So it's like inventing something totally new.
Exactly. Or it could be about strategic mergers and partnerships. You team up with someone instead of fighting them. And on a larger scale, think about something like the Cold War. That was a whole lot of attack by stratagem, using things like containment, economic pressure, trying to achieve goals without direct military conflict.
So it's like a chess match, right?
Yeah, very much so. You're thinking several moves ahead, trying to anticipate, outmaneuver your opponent.
And when Sun Tzu talks about preserving the enemy's assets, what's the modern equivalent of that?
I'd say it's those win-win situations, Like in a negotiation, finding a solution where both sides walk away feeling like they gained something. Or, a company might acquire a competitor but then work to integrate their employees and their best practices rather than just dismantling the whole thing.
Oh, yeah. You see that a lot in mergers and acquisitions these days.
Yeah. And of course, there's that fundamental principle of knowing your enemy and knowing yourself. That's all about doing your research, understanding your competitors, knowing your own strengths and weaknesses.
And it's about constantly analyzing, adapting, right? Because things change.
Exactly. The competitive landscape is never static. Okay, so for our listeners who want to start implementing this attack by stratagem, what are the key takeaways here?
Yeah, let's break it down for them.
First, always explore those win-win solutions. Or, even better, find a way to achieve your goal without any conflict at all. Make it so your opponent sees that resistance is pointless.
Right. Make them surrender without firing a shot.
Yeah, that's the ideal. Second takeaway, invest heavily in gathering information. Know your competitors inside and out, know the market trends, know your own weaknesses. Only engage in direct conflict when you have a clear advantage.
So it's like doing your due diligence, not just rushing into things.
Exactly. And finally, build a team that's unified, adaptable, ready to seize opportunities when they arise.
Okay, so we've talked about planning, efficient execution, and winning without fighting.
Right.
Now let's shift to another key aspect of the art of war, building a strong defensive position. This is Chapter 4, Tactical Dispositions.
This chapter emphasizes a crucial principle. Before you even think about attacking, you need to secure yourself against defeat.
So it's about building that solid foundation first.
Exactly. Sun Tzu says, the good fighters of old first put themselves beyond the possibility of defeat and then waited for an opportunity of defeating the enemy. So it's about being proactive, taking steps to make yourself invulnerable, and then patiently waiting for the right moment to strike.
Don't just rush in blindly.
Right, right. And he makes an important distinction. To secure ourselves against defeat lies in our own hands, but the opportunity of defeating the enemy is provided by the enemy himself.
Ooh, that's a good one.
So you control your preparedness, but you can't always control what your opponent does. You have to be ready to capitalize on their mistakes.
So it's about minimizing your own errors and being ready when they make theirs.
Exactly. And Sun Tzu, he really stresses minimizing errors, he says. He wins his battles by making no mistakes.
So it's about flawless execution.
Yeah, gotta be tight. And there's also this crucial balance between being defensive and being offensive. A strong defense gives you security, but you also need to be able to attack to achieve victory.
So it's not about just being passive and waiting around,
No, you gotta be ready to strike when the opportunity arises.
but from a position of strength.
Exactly. And Sun Tzu makes this interesting observation about different kinds of generals. He says that a skilled general will wait until victory is assured before engaging in battle. But a less skillful one will just jump in and hope for a good outcome.
So it's about patience, isn't it?
Yeah, knowing when to act and when to hold back. He even talks about knowing how to conquer without being able to do it.
What does he mean by that?
I think he means that sometimes, even though you might have the capability to achieve something, the timing isn't right. You need to wait for the right moment.
Okay, so let's bring this to the present day. How does this play out in the business world?
Well, think about a startup that's building a new product.
Okay.
Before they start spending tons of money on marketing or trying to grow really fast, they want to make sure they have their finances in order, that their product is high quality.
Right, so they're securing themselves against defeat.
Exactly. It's about building that solid foundation first.
And it's like an investing, right?
Yeah, if you're smart, you diversify your portfolio.
Yeah.
You have some safer investments to protect yourself if the market takes a downturn.
So you don't lose everything if things go south.
Right. And in business, it's about having those resilient systems, robust cybersecurity, strong customer relationships, things that can withstand a bit of pressure.
So you can weather the storm.
Exactly. And let's not forget about making no mistakes. That's about operational excellence.
Quality control,
Hmm.
efficient processes, that kind of thing.
Right. You want to be known for being reliable, for delivering on your promises. That can be a powerful deterrent.
Okay, so what about that patience aspect?
Well, just because you have the resources to launch a new product, enter a new market, doesn't mean you should rush into it. Sometimes the smartest move is to wait, to watch the market, see what your competitors are doing, and then make your move when the time is right.
Timing is everything.
It really can be.
Yeah.
Think about Apple.
Okay.
They're often not the first to market with a new product, but they take their time, they get it right, and then they launch it when they know it's going to make a splash.
They create that hype.
Yeah, exactly. And in our own lives, it could be about something like having an emergency fund. Before you take a big financial risk, you want to have a cushion just in case things don't go as planned.
So you're protecting yourself.
Exactly. It's that same principle.
Okay, so key takeaways from Chapter 4.
Number 1, Build a strong defense. Identify your weak spots and fix them. Whether it's your finances, your cybersecurity, whatever it is, make yourself resilient.
Number 2.
Be patient. Watch your opponents carefully. Wait for them to make mistakes.
And then pounce.
Yeah, exactly. Don't be impulsive. Choose your battles.
Number 3.
Minimize your own mistakes. Sun Tzu's make no mistakes principle, that's about being diligent, having strong processes, paying attention to details.
Right, it's about quality and efficiency.
Exactly. And lastly, strike a balance.
Between defense and offense.
Yeah. Be ready to seize opportunities when they arise, but do it from a position of strength. Don't just be reactive, and don't be reckless.
So you have to be strategic, always thinking a few steps ahead.
Exactly.
Okay, this has been great so far. I'm really enjoying this conversation.
Me too.
Let's move on to Chapter 5, Energy. This one's about effectively deploying your resources and generating momentum.
Yeah. This chapter is about creating that unstoppable force, about taking your plans and making them a reality.
Turning that potential energy into kinetic energy, right?
Exactly. And Sun Tzu talks about using both normal and extraordinary force.
Okay, break that down for me.
Well, the normal force is your everyday, straightforward tactics. But the extraordinary force is where you get creative, unexpected, maybe a little unorthodox.
So it's about having that element of surprise.
Yeah, keeping your opponent guessing. And he uses this analogy of musical notes, There are only so many notes, but the combinations are endless.
Oh, I like that.
So it is, with strategy, you can take those basic building blocks and combine them in all sorts of ways.
To create something unique and powerful.
Exactly. And Sun Tzu, he puts a lot of emphasis on momentum.
Yeah. Once you have it, it's hard to stop.
Right. He uses this analogy of a dam bursting or a boulder rolling down a hill. That unstoppable force, even a smaller force, if it has momentum, can be incredibly impactful.
Makes sense. And how do you control that flow?
Well, Sun Tzu talks about accumulating potential energy and then releasing it at the right time. It's about timing, knowing when to hold back and when to strike, and communication is key. You got to make sure everyone's coordinated, working together. He talks about using gongs and drums to direct armies, making sure everyone's on the same page.
So it's about being on the same beat.
Yes, exactly. And you don't want your forces to get tired, to burn out, So he talks about using reserves, rotating troops, keeping people fresh.
So it's about sustainability too.
Right, maintaining that momentum over the long haul.
Okay, so in today's world, what does this look like?
Well, think about innovation.
Right.
A company might have their core business, their bread and butter.
Right.
But they also need to be exploring new ideas, experimenting with new technologies. That's the extraordinary force.
Like a two-pronged approach.
Exactly. And building momentum, that's about those companies that just seem to be constantly innovating, launching new products, keeping their competitors on their toes.
Staying ahead of the curve.
Yeah. And then there's coordination. Think about a big product launch, You've got engineering, marketing, sales. All those different departments need to be working together seamlessly. It's like an orchestra.
Everyone playing their part.
Exactly. And Sun Tzu's force multipliers, those are the things that amplify your effectiveness. It could be technology, a strong brand reputation, the network effects of having a lot of users on a platform.
Yeah, things that give you a leg up.
Exactly. Even in our own lives, it's about finding those tools and systems that help us get more done more efficiently.
Like automation or delegation.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's unpredictability.
Keep them guessing.
Right. If you always do the same thing, your competitors will figure you out. So you got to mix it up, keep them off balance.
So what's a real-world example of all this coming together?
Well, think about Apple's product launches.
Okay.
They're so well coordinated. They build up this anticipation, and then bam, they hit you with that one more thing.
Right, the surprise reveal.
Yeah, it's classic Sun Tzu. Or think about the military tactic of blitzkrieg.
Okay.
The Germans in World War II, they combined tanks, infantry, air power, all moving really fast in a coordinated way, just overwhelming the enemy.
So it's about that synergy.
Exactly. Okay, key takeaways from Chapter 5 for our listeners.
Hit me.
First, mix up your tactics. Don't just rely on one approach. Combine the direct with the unexpected. Keep your opponents guessing.
Be creative.
Yeah. Second, build momentum. Look for early wins, iterate quickly, generate some buzz, and once you have that momentum going, press your advantage.
Don't let up. Okay, number 3.
Coordination, communication.
And teamwork.
Yeah. Make sure your team is in sync, working towards a common goal. And practice, practice, practice. The more coordinated you are, the more impactful you'll be.
Okay, number 4.
Be unpredictable. Don't let your competitors figure you out. Change it up, stay ahead of the game.
Okay, last one.
Leverage those force multipliers. Figure out what those things are for you, technology, a strong culture, whatever it is, and invest in them. They'll amplify your efforts and help you achieve more with less.
Awesome. This is great stuff. Okay, on to Chapter 6, Weak Points and Strong. This is all about exploiting vulnerabilities and avoiding head-on confrontations.
Yeah, this is where Sun Tzu gets into the nitty-gritty of strategic maneuvering. It's about picking your battles, focusing your energy where it will have the most impact.
Work smarter, not harder.
Exactly. Sun Tzu lays it out very clearly. So in war, the way is to avoid what is strong and strike at what is weak.
So simple, but so profound.
Right. It's finding that path of least resistance, exploiting your opponent's vulnerabilities.
And he talks about not making yourself an easy target.
Yeah, don't be predictable.
Don't let them know what you're going to do next.
Right. You want to be elusive, make them waste their energy trying to figure you out. And he makes this interesting point about attacking where the enemy has to defend. If you can force them to focus on one specific point, well, that can create weaknesses elsewhere. They've got to divert their resources, spread themselves thin.
It's like a distraction tactic.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's creating and seizing opportunities, luring the enemy with a small gain, making them think they're getting the upper hand, and then striking when they're unprepared.
It's like setting a trap.
Yes, exactly. It's about shaping the battlefield, making the enemy's strengths irrelevant and exposing their weaknesses.
Smart.
And Sun Tzu, he's a big believer in speed. You want to arrive before the enemy can reinforce, attack where they're not expecting it. He uses this beautiful analogy of being shapeless like water.
Okay, I like that.
It's about adapting, being fluid, going with the flow, finding the cracks in your opponent's defenses.
So how does this translate to, the business world or our personal lives?
Well, think about a small company going up against a giant.
David and Goliath.
Yeah. They're not going to win by trying to compete head to head, are they? They got to find a niche, a market where the big guy isn't paying attention, and then they can dominate that space.
It's about finding that unique angle.
Exactly. Or think about those companies that are really good at adapting to change.
Okay.
They're not afraid to pivot their business model, try new things, adjust to the market conditions. That's being shapeless. And in negotiations, it's often better to avoid those points where your opponent is really strong.
Right. Don't pick a fight you can't win.
Exactly. Focus on those areas where they're weaker, where you have an advantage. And even in our personal lives, it's about recognizing our own strengths and focusing on those areas where we can really excel.
So it's about playing to your strengths, avoiding your weaknesses, and exploiting your opponent's weaknesses.